Hi, this is Fiona again with tips 4 to 6 in hopefully under 5 minutes. Tip number 4 is to develop reading fluency and a specific strategy that we use in the Writing Road to Reading Spalding method. We know that you need spaced practice to remember something. I'm not sure how often schools remind parents to go back to the spelling lists from earlier weeks and earlier terms and continue to practice them very frequently. We have a special technique for doing this in Spalding called reading for spelling and reading for reading. This happens daily in a Spalding classroom. This is how it works. Me, d, do, at, and. So sounding out is reading for spelling, and then reading the whole word is reading for reading. We have the children go down the columns to do this every single day as part of their spelling lesson. We don't want them to be doing sight words or memorising the word. We want them to be practising the skills of phonics, phonemic awareness, and reading fluency. So what we do is change it up. Some days we'll just simply read down a column, other days we'll read up a column, and other days we'll read across a column, so that it's not possible just to remember me, do, and go at. If you have work coming home like this that's very repetitive, Monday to Thursday, just maybe read up the column. Sometimes you could start in the middle of a column. You could get them to read every second word. And a slight variation to the reading for spelling and reading for reading strategy happens with multi-syllable words. In this case, we split them into syllables, doing. So the reading for spelling involves the syllables. Fry, end, friend, happy. When there's a double letter, make sure they pronounce both letters. If you're not sure how to put words into syllables, one simple way that often works is each syllable needs a vowel. So that's why friend is split in the middle there. Most schools wouldn't send words home in syllable format. We do in a Spalding classroom. So you might have to just use a / to split them up for your child. Okay, that's a summary of helping to work towards fluent reading later on. Now we're going to talk about sentences. We often hear that children in secondary and even tertiary students don't know how to write a complete sentence. So in the Spalding method, we model sentences orally right from day one. When they're still learning to write at the word level, we're modelling ahead for the sentence level by doing it orally. You can do this as a parent as well. Just make up sentences for your spelling words for that week. But this example from the Spalding handbook shows you the level of detail in this method. So the word was simply at, one of the very first words that the children would be learning in prep. And this is the dialogue. The next word is at. Listen carefully to this sentence. The children are at school. And that is contrasted with the children are at home. So this is partly to build vocabulary, perhaps for students who are not English speakers, but it's also building the foundation for teaching parts of speech formally later on, because at is a preposition and it's demonstrating in context how a preposition works in the sentence. Here's another example demonstrating verb use. The word do, Bill, do your lesson. It's an action word because it shows something is happening. And so in the Spalding method, they do that. They put the word in a sentence, and then, as covered in my last video, they will do the finger scaffolding to get the children to sound it out and then to write it. Sorry, what was that? Oh, that last one here is just showing the transition eventually into doing their first written sentences. So as they move on from the word level, class, you've been learning spelling words in oral sentences for a few weeks. Now you will compose written sentences. And then it's right from the beginning models what a complete thought is in a sentence. Essentially subject, verb, object, and the parts of speech. So this is very explicit teaching. This is a year 1 classroom, and we hear that university students don't have that concept of what a sentence actually is. Final tip is 6, reading in the home. I just wanted to emphasize the importance of that parent as the first teacher. That's happened historically from generation to generation, mothers to daughters and sons, and fathers to daughters and sons. This is an original ABC alphabet frieze I found on the internet. It's on some sort of paddle, and you've got your alphabet and phonics and the Lord's Prayer. But it's just important to have that sort of reading material available, and it's even more meaningful for your child if it's got a connection to you. So this person's made it out of sticks. I've put the pastels there because I vividly remember my mother making me an alphabet frieze, A is for apple, that she illustrated herself. And it just brings back to this day such warm, happy memories to think of that connection with my mother from making that for me. In my home, my father left school at the age of 12 and my mother left school at 16. So we weren't a fancy educated family, but my parents did some very good basic things like sharing the time with us and making things like that. My parents also took us constantly to the library, even though we couldn't afford a large collection of books in our home. And in the Spalding method, they just highlight the point that you can look for covers with the stickers of the book award winning books, because it's just a good way to find really good quality, beautiful books to share with your children. So in America, it's the Caldecott Award books, the Newbery Medal winners, and in Australia, the Children's Book Council of Australia. It's actually good if you want to look them up online, because I know I discovered a lot of books I'd never heard of by searching for them in the library from the lists. And lastly, on top of books, it's interesting to think about the general printed material in the home. As I said, my parents weren't highly educated, but we always had newspapers because that was the cultural practice of the time. Now my husband and I are university educated and we read online digital newspapers, but it just occurred to me this week, my son never reads a newspaper. And interestingly, at my school, work at a boarding school, they intentionally deliver newspapers to the students' rooms every day. They have very limited internet access at my school, but it's interesting that they've developed this practice of reading newspapers that they didn't have before they started at the school. And a final note on that before I finish up, with the Black Lives Matter issue at the moment, I've seen a lot of discussion online about people not knowing Australia's history with massacres of Indigenous people. And it's very interesting. I remember at the age of 10 finding a newspaper in my home and reading in the Saturday magazine section about an exceptionally brutal massacre that occurred. And I'm sure my parents didn't know I read it because the details of essentially torture were so explicit. And I'm going to try and find this article at some point at the State Library, because certainly I was aware from the age of 10 that these things happened, but only because in my home we had the newspaper. Just in extending the idea of the alphabet frieze, you can make things that are meaningful to share between you and your child as they move on to the digraphs. Okay, as always, I'll pop a link in the description to the Writing Road to Reading, because that's the method I'm trained in and have used for 20 years. It's a 450-page, essentially a textbook for teachers. If you're reading this as a teacher, not a parent, I think it's an absolutely essential reference in your professional library. Okay, sorry, I've gone 9 minutes, not 5, but I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for listening. Bye for now.